Today, our speakers, one from Afghanistan and one from Bhutan. It's going to be a really exciting session. Thank you, Daud Sadiq and Sonam Lethu for joining us. This series, as you know, has been focusing on emergent practices in South Asia. We have now heard from 18 speakers. The range of issues have been really incredible. The specificities from particular regions, but also the commonalities of issues across South Asia have been something worth sort of reflecting on. But most importantly, what has emerged are the different ways young practitioners are engaging with the issues they're dealing with in this region. And from that is emerging different models of practice, different calibrations of kind of traditional practices and contemporary ways of looking at things, and many other formulations. And of course, in each of the countries within this region, the constraints, the issues, the politics are completely different, which is giving rise to a range of ways of doing things and addressing these often wicked problems in innovative ways. And so today we are doing our 10th session. We have one more session in this series for this season, so to speak. In the fall semester, we will renew this conversation. That last session will be on April 1st, and we'll have a speaker from Bangladesh and one from India, who I'll talk about briefly at the end of this session if we have the time. But let's jump into our session today without losing more time. We will start with the presentation by Sonam Lethu, who is from Bhutan. He studied architecture in Western Australia and did that was his master's degree, and his bachelor's degree was at the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. He has been doing very interesting work in Bhutan in that he looks at healthcare infrastructure. He also does project management simultaneously and does a whole range of buildings, institutional buildings, but also residential and commercial. And he worked for a while as a general manager for the National Housing Development Corporation in Bhutan. This was for a year, but I can imagine that must have, Sonam, been a very interesting experience, not only to work directly with the government, but also to get an insight into how infrastructure is being deployed in a place like in Bhutan. He has been acknowledged by the Majesty, the King of Bhutan, for his years of service in health and care infrastructure. He's received a medal for that, and he's been recognized in many other forums. He believes architecture is also about telling the story or narrating a history, as he puts it, and embracing cultural values. And in Bhutan, specifically, this is a question because not only is it partly official policy, but the presence within a small country of a continuity in the tradition is something that an architect can't ignore, and working within those constraints, and not constraints, but within that framework, and actually addressing new types and new requirements in the modern world and balancing it with the heritage is an incredible challenge. So we'll hear first from Sonam, but I'm going to also introduce Daud Sadiq, who will speak after Sonam. Daud's from Afghanistan. He works as a project architect with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in Kabul, and he studied at the Faculty of Engineering, Kabul University, and has been working for over a decade and a half in the field of conservation, restoration, and historical monuments in Afghanistan. He has led for the Aga Khan Cultural Services key projects in Herat, Balak, and in Kabul. And more particularly in 2004, he was commissioned in Herat for conservation of historic buildings and monuments in the old city of Herat under the framework of the Herat City Support Program, which is an Aga Khan program, and worked on a whole scale of projects there, which is absolutely fascinating and incredibly impressive. He has also carried on with that experience. He then went to Kabul and worked on the Kabul riverfront transformation project. Is a very significant public space, and also has been continued to be involved in education programs, and he's done some in Italy, in the US, and in the Middle East, in UAE and Oman. And so his expertise around conservation in that part of the world, outside even Afghanistan, is quite significant. But he brings to us a voice from Afghanistan, which in the present context is also quite critical, both in terms of conservation, but also practicing and yet working on the field. And he continues to work on the field in Afghanistan, which is something worth hearing and listening to and learning from. So I'm very much looking forward to this session. I'm going to hand it over to Sonam, and Duad, after that you can join, and then I hope we can have a good 20 or 30 minutes for conversation, because that becomes a very important part of these discussions. So thank you very much once again, and Sonam, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rahul, for the introduction. It is my great pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to be part of the lecture series for the emerging practices in South Asia. Before I begin, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Rahul and his team for giving me this opportunity to present Bhutanese architecture in this forum. I hope my screen is visible to all. Okay.
Yes, all good.
Okay. So today, the topic which I am going to present is on extending the Bhutanese architecture. So I'll be touching on two projects. One is a completed project, and one we have just recently finished design, but it will be starting construction with, by the middle of this year. The first project is Mother and Child Hospital. It is under the name of Her Majesty the Queen of Bhutan, Gyaltsen Jisen Pema. The second is the Pema Center. It's a behavioral health hospital located in Thimphu. To begin with, I will just touch down on the background of where Bhutan is and few details, because I'm sure that there's many of you might not know where Bhutan is actually located. Bhutan is a small landlocked country located in South Asia, bordered by India to the south, east, west, and China to the north. The population of Bhutan is 731,608, and Thimphu is the main capital city. And Dongkha is the official language of Bhutan, although there are other many languages spoken throughout the country. Bhutan is constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy established in 2008. The king of Bhutan serves as the head of the state, while the prime minister is the head of the government. And our economy is largely based on agriculture, forestry, hydropower, and tourism. And we believe and we have a strong commitment to environmental conservation and sustainable development. Understanding the Bhutanese context is very important to understand. Before I jump into architecture, it's very important to understand what are the values we look into. And as an architect, a practicing architect, what we look into and what do we follow as a whole in the country. The main important vision we follow is the vision of our king, the gross national happiness, the measure of economic and moral progress that the king of Bhutan introduced in the 1970s as an alternative to the gross domestic product. Rather than focusing strictly on quantitative economic measures, gross national happiness takes into account an evolving mix of quality of life factors. There are 4 pillars in GNH. One is good governance, sustainable development, environmental conservation, and the most important we are looking at as an architect and a designer is preservation and promotion of our culture. So that's where we look into our cultural identity as a whole. And it's very important to understand what traditional Bhutanese architecture usually is all about. So I'll just make it very brief on this. So here we have 3 main details. So first is Bhutanese architecture is very unique in style that reflects its cultural identity and tradition. Second, we have a strong emphasis on preservation of our local traditional architecture. And third, for the modern construction industry, what we do is we adhere to the rules and regulations of Bhutanese architecture. We make sure that our architecture is not changed. So we try to keep as much as possible Bhutanese. So if you, in a very simple, straightforward language, Bhutanese architecture is mainly an element, the painting and the ornaments. And if you look at Bhutanese architectural built form, we have, if you look at especially into the institutional buildings, it was considered as the main fortresses before. The fortresses were the main institutional buildings, and the built typology were mainly courtyard system and semi-courtyard as well. And roofing plays a major building expression in this. So we have two types, hip and gable roofing. And materials, we have wood, stone, and ram earth when it comes to vernacular architecture. If you look at the evolving contemporary design or evolving contemporary built environment, it's very important to understand from a settlement level. So if you look at these two images, on the right side, what you see is the traditional Bhutanese settlement. This is what it used to be in Bhutan, and it's still prominent in the rural part of Bhutan till today. But if you look at the left side, you see the contemporary settlement. Now, this is why this is the new urban development in the country, and you can see a lot of RCC frame structures coming up, and the settlement is totally different. And even in typology, we can see a variation. In before, it was totally traditional cluster typology design and planning was there, but due to urbanization, now we have grid planning typology. And at the building scale level, traditional Bhutanese house are very different from what we see today in the modern Bhutanese buildings. Before, traditional Bhutanese house in the ground floor, they used to have a storage space for food, grain, and even animal shelter. And top floor used to be mainly the habitable space. Whereas now with the trend of modernization, we have apartment systems. And that is where we, as an architect, we try to blend in as much as possible based on the tradition of Bhutan. So we try to keep our traditional architecture as much as possible, even in modern context. This image shows clear differences between where we are at and what was before. You can see a traditional building in the front, and at the back, you can see a modern hotel. Even on the right side picture, there's a variation of the existing traditional house and the modern building at the back. As an architect, we feel it is our responsibility to take care of what our tradition and cultural identity should respond in terms of architecture. This is a modern architecture building, which is in the center of the city. So you can see the huge variance and difference between what the traditional architecture looks like and what a modern Bhutanese architecture has come up with. So this is very important as an architect to understand. So now if I go to the details of my project, the first project is on Her Majesty Galsin Jitun Pema Mother and Child Hospital. The project is located in Thimphu. It's a 150-bedded mother and child hospital, and the project cost was around near term 200 million, which is equivalent to Indian INR. And the funding is RGOB, Royal Government of Bhutan, and Government of India. We finished the design and drawings in the year 2015, and first phase completion is done for the project. And we'll be completing the second phase construction by May this year. The total area of the whole site is 38.5 acres in the Jigme Dorji Wangchuck National Referral Hospital. But for this mother and child hospital, it is 3.5 acres. And this is the first referral hospital for mother and child in Bhutan. When we started this design concept, since I was the first hospital architect in the country and the hospital designer in the country, then later we had a new architect. The two of us, we worked on this project. The main important part we were looking at was how do we look into this hospital design as an institutional building. once the institutional building, we wanted to correlate with what the traditional institutional building used to look like. So that's where the concept started looking, we started looking at those concepts. The first thing we did was play with different forms. We wanted to see whether we should go with the solid block structure, a full courtyard, semi-courtyard, or based on the functional needs. So what we did is we looked into creating open space and built form, keeping in mind the importance of the space planning, which is very important in hospitals. So we tried to create that, and we looked into developing a building expression which has a sense of contemporary hospital design, but also not forgetting that we have to incorporate the traditional architecture features in the design. So that's what we looked at. And during the design process, topography played a major role. One side of the design was how we design based on the topography and how the terrains can be part of the built form itself, and how the courtyard can be built at different levels. So this is the main block, if you look at it. Here, what we try to do is we try to resonate the same language which is there in traditional Bhutanese architecture. We wanted to make sure that the proportion of the rapse, which is the Bhutanese element, which you can see here. So proportion of the rapse is equivalent, is easily fits with the proportion of the building scale. We had to look at that. We also made sure that the building materials were local. So what we did is we wanted to have the texture of stone as well. So this stone is stone chip cladding, which we built. And then we also wanted to have timber as the main rapse component. And then, of course, the Bhutanese ornaments and the paintings, we wanted to make sure we have that. So if you look at the pictures, you can see that even the roofing also, we wanted to make sure it's resemblance what the Bhutanese architecture should look like. We wanted to have a gable roof, also hip roof, and see how the proportion works. And the most important part, which when we looked into the building facade, was looking into different types of color tones we wanted to have. So the painting, the color white, the stone, the wood, the ornament paints, these were all taken care. So we also had a discussion with a lot of local painters, how to go about it, and then we came to this result. So even when it comes to interiors, the most important feel we wanted to give to the interior space was that the Bhutanese people, when they visit this hospital, they shouldn't feel like they are going to a new structure or a new alien space, but they should feel at home. So that's the reason why we decided to come up with timber, wooden architraves, timber doors, and interior design. So even we also tried to incorporate wall murals based on, because it's a mother and child hospital. So we wanted to have that feel of children's play area, a nice, colorful, vibrant walls. And for the second project, this is very unique compared to the other one. The first one was mainly RCC structure with normal brick wall and all. For the Pema Center, the main, since it's a behavioral health hospital, the most important part when we designed this project, when we came up with this, was a thorough research on how do these patients really respond to a space. So that was the most important part. This project is also Her Majesty the Queen's project. And we wanted to make sure that this whole project, the whole design intention was based on the concept of a healing environment. So what we wanted to do here was to look into the building to have more of a natural lighting. We also wanted to make sure there is the earth tone color to the whole building.
Might have frozen, but let's give him a couple of minutes. I'm sorry, but I think the best thing to do would be to wait for a minute for him to reconnect. If he doesn't reconnect, then Daud, we might go to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just for our participants, I'll use the time to just make some announcement. I made a mistake. We actually have 2 more sessions for the series. The next one will be on April 1st, and the one that follows that will be on April 28th. The April 1st session is actually the session that was going to be on the 25th of March, which has been moved back to April 1st for various scheduling reasons. Has been moved to April 8th for various scheduling reasons. And so we have April 1st and April 8th as the next 2 sessions. So I just wanted to use the time to bring that to everyone's notice. Of course, we'll send out an email. Sonam, sorry, we lost you. If you can reconnect.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, some technical issues. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we are at the second project right now. So just an update. Okay. So the site is located in Doji Wangchu National Referral Hospital, which is around 2.3 acres. So we have different entry to the site. So when we do a hospital design, what we try to do is we always try to make sure we segregate the entry of the staff and the entry of the OPD patients differently. So different parking spaces for both the traffics. So we plan like that. So when it comes to this design, what we did is we started with understanding the built form masses based on the topography, based on the built form, based on even how we want to segregate each of the departments based on their own services. We also wanted to make sure that this design is also taken care based on the sun part azimuth angle analysis. So that's what we did with this. So if you look at the site plan, what we have is this graph here. It shows how the green spaces are developed in this area. And then we also wanted to make sure there's a separate entry for both the different disciplines of services, for OPD services and visitors, and also for the patient or the staff for the separate entry. Then since this is a behavioral health hospital, we want to make sure that the line of vision is very important here. The behavioral health patient should be visibly seen by the staff. So that's how the design has been planned. So if you look at this, the upper side, we planned totally OPD and IPDs, and the lower part was the main critically ill, mental ill patients, who needs more of security services. So that's how the design zoning were planned. The whole building construction were done based on using local materials. So we want to plan as such that we use more local instead of foreign materials. But however, since it's a hospital, we want to make sure that it is also done in RCC frame structure. So what we did here is we have used RCC frame structure, but the walls are rammed earth blocks. And we want to use more of a timber here. And even we wanted to make sure that this building has solar energy supply. So we have also looked into how to get a renewable source of energy through solar. So when it comes to courtyard facilities, we wanted to make sure there's semi-open courtyard spaces created, so that the patient, whenever they come in, they shouldn't feel like they move into a different alien space. They should feel like home. So that's why we felt the color, the context, the material choice should be all Bhutanese. So if you look at the landscape, we wanted to make sure the vegetation, the plants, whichever we are going to propose, should benefit the health of the patient. So we even discussed with a few of the florists in Bhutan, in Thimphu, and they have suggested a few of the plants which should be grown during the construction time. And we also looked into timber technology. Then we wanted to look into RAM art technology. And of course, we wanted to make sure outside it is wood, but inside we wanted to make sure it's all UPVC windows, which are, we also wanted to have floor heating systems. Then when it came to the outdoor pavement, we wanted to have locally made stone available for this project. and keeping in mind the texture of how the local architecture should look at. And we also wanted to have some of the areas to be painted with artworks, which are very pleasant to look at. And we wanted to bring in local artisans. The whole project was based on earth, stone, and green, so earth tone colors. So if you look at this elevation, you can see it is more of very subtle building elevation, which doesn't stand out a lot, but it is very Bhutanese in building expression. So this is the courtyard. We also added a few cafeterias in the design so that the patient visitors can sit down with their family and have a coffee and have a discussion, family timing together during the visiting hours. And the courtyard itself becomes like a therapeutic environmental space for the patient. The key points from what I've learned from the designing healthcare facilities in Bhutan was, firstly, healthcare design based on local context is a very important thing. Initially, before 2013, I was just 3 years in job. I was just 3 years in service in the government that time. What I learned was we have sat down with a lot of doctors, the end users, even from the maintenance section, we sat down with them. We found a lot of issues with the hospital designs which were done before. Most of the hospital designs were done in Bhutan, were from the neighboring countries. The consultant used to come to the low cost consultant used to get the bid and all. So then what happened is most of the design which were done in India was used here in Bhutan at the Bhutanese level. So that has a major implication when it comes to services because it didn't match the level of context where in Bhutan. The way the healthcare system functions in Bhutan, the way the patient works in Bhutan is very different compared to other places. So that is very important, I feel, as an architect, that we should know about any design of hospital should be based on the context of which region we are planning for. And secondly, design based on end users' needs is very important because we should learn the way how the doctors are functioning in this region and how the patients are functioning in this region. Here in Bhutan, it's very family oriented. So if there's one patient is admitted in hospital, the whole family comes to visit. So we always have to look into how to look into those kind of difficulties and how to make sure it is patient friendly. Then, of course, in third, we also looked at the analysis of flow of hospital space planning is very important. This is how we want to make sure the standard designs are always there, where the services should be located, where the critical care should be located. We look into that. And at last but not the least, I think the most important part of any healthcare industry when I was designing in Bhutan was understanding the healthcare industry is very important. This is where we look at latest technology, latest equipment, latest healthcare services. So when we designed these 2 hospitals, we visited different types of hospitals around Southeast Asia. We have been to Singapore. We went to did a case study on KK Hospital, Mother and Child in Singapore, which was a very fantastic case study we did. And we also visited Khoo Port Hospital in Singapore, which has won a lot of awards. It's also a LEED award-winning hospital in Singapore. And also we visited a few hospitals in Thailand and India, and we tried to understand this all correlations between how these different location hospitals are built based on their own context. So these are the things, learning principles which we had when we did as a hospital designer. And yes, that's the whole presentation. And if anyone wants to contact me after this presentation on later finishing, these are the details. So thank you.
Thank you, Sonam. Thank you very much. And thank you. In spite of getting logged off, you finished precisely on time. So we very much appreciate that. And thanks for this exposition and the many issues you've raised, which I hope we can pick up during the conversation. And I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience too. So thanks again. And Daud, can you then share your screen? And can you stop sharing your screen, Sonam?
Okay, sure.
Hit stop share. Thank you. Thank you. You can hit full screen. Yeah. Yeah. There you
Yeah.
are. Yeah. Thank you. And over to you, Daud.
Thank you. Good morning and good evening, everyone. So I will be presenting two projects, one in Herat and one in Baal. So Herat is a historic city, and this is currently a regional capital of Afghanistan. It has very significant Islamic buildings. So this is this layout, aerial image shows the old city of Herat. It has 4 quarters, and it was drawn by British engineers during their presence in Herat. It shows 4 quarters of old city and the fortification. So this is again old city of Herat. You could see the citadel. I will present that later on. And this is 1.5 kilometer by 1.5 kilometer city wall, a fortification, which is 30 meter wide and 25 meters up. So these are the challenges in Herat post 2000 when repatriation, the migrant return, they brought strange architectural styles. There was a lot of destruction by uncontrolled development. So also and some of them, between inheritors, when they divided their house, so it was not accommodate for them. Herat has very harsh climate, so the building that they want to, build, so it was not compatible with the Herati climate because it's rising up to 48 degrees Celsius during summertime and drop up to minus 35 during winter time. So what we had in Herat old city? This is private houses. You could see stucco work on the ceilings. You could see geometrical patterns. This was typical houses. Here, I would be stuck to my time. I want to show you one of my first project, which was very inspiring for me. That was a private house. So this is a Tarbashi house in 2005. I deployed to Herat, to walk along the old city. I had a sketchboard with me that time, and a digital camera, and a measure tape. I was looking for those houses that has architectural characteristics. So my job was to sketch them and take a photograph. So which later on I was engaged to this house, to restore this house. So this was very overwhelming. I mean, the scale of destruction of this house was a lot. So we recycled a lot and use, as much as the traditional technique that we're using in Herat architecture. So the damage was due to, disrepair, neglect, and drainage system. I could say there was also a natural disaster like termites. So I have a lot of slides, but I'm just going quickly because this was a private house, and this was a central port. This is my first dome construction. That was the time there were no artisans and crafts. Some of the craftsmen were died, or it was not descending the craftsmanship to their descendant. So I was very difficult to find, and to work properly. So we were able to manage and to, to train a lot of people during the course of conservation as a pilot project. We were using traditional technique, anything that I hear from people, using, animal fat for waterproofing, eggs, also using, natural fibers, for sticking material, for the pillar. There is a wooden pillar, you see there. And, we applying the mud plaster, it was not sticking to it, but by chance, I saw on one of the damaged column, so they were twisted, a kind of natural fiber rope. So this is the finishing inside. This is, you see the city council, they were sitting inside the room that was damaged. And this is the internal space of the houses. So this is isometric view of the houses, because why I'm showing this building. This is a very self-sustainable housing system. It has two ports, a courtyard with two ports, summer port and winter port. On a summer port, you could see a series of wind catcher. When wind is blowing, there is a kind of duct system. It was connected to three floors. Basement, ground floor, and first floor. So this technique was very working, and I spent a lot of time in this house during the winter. I keep as an office here. So this was absolutely very good climate and very for Herati climate, it was very responsible. So this is a northern facade during conservation and after, and this is the summer port. This is my presentation, Ikhtiyar-Uddin Citadel, Herat. So, this citadel, most visible landmark in the region and one of the survived citadel in that region. So from its foundation, 500 BC as an ancient Arpakwana, and it rebuilt by Alexander the Great during his campaign against Achaemenid, 300 BC. So this citadel has witnessed a lot of changes, many times it was destroyed and rebuilt. So in 1225, it was sieged and completely destroyed by Genghis Khan. And it was again destroyed and rebuilt by Tamerlane, and his son Shahrukh chosen Herat as a capital for his empire, and he was living in this citadel. In 1976, UNESCO joined with the government, central government of Afghanistan, had conducted a conservation initiative through the citadel, and it was not fully completed when Soviet occupied the region, and the citadel went to a war zone again, and they brought heavy artilleries, machines, because it has very dominant location through the city, and it was badly damaged. So this is in our time, we collect all, even we destroy all these things, and we remove all the weapons from the top of the towers. And so this is citadel after restoration. In 2008, the custodianship of the citadel went to the Ministry of Information and Culture. This citadel always used for military purpose. It has two parts, the lower citadel and upper citadel. The upper citadel was the the royal court, and the lower citadel were using for as a military garrisons, and also stable for animals. So in 2009, when we received the fund from US State Department, so we began work on the lower citadel, and then on the second phase, on the upper citadel. So the work were contained reconstruction of the southern gate, the western gate, construction of amphitheater, consolidation of Timurid Tower, and reconstruction of the royal court, and stabilization of the eastern glacis or embankment. So this is the drawing of the citadel. So, and also there is a section. So it means the citadel were built on a man-made hill, and lower citadel, part of lower citadel and the upper citadel was completely made, by artificial hill. So this was the, the technique that we were using for constructing world on a different, different size and different approaches. In 2003, Herat municipality, expanded a greenery area around the citadel. So there was a series of shops on the eastern embankment. So they destroyed that shops. So it somehow, destabilized the towers or the embankment because there was a lot of erosions. So we designed fire brick buttresses, and we erected them and connected to the upper terraces and to the basement. And between the buttresses, we filled back with the archaeological debris, and we finished with the stone pavement as a glacis. This is southern gate. There were two walls that were meeting in this point. So all these three walls were leaning and destabilized. We reconstructed the tower and stabilized all these three walls. This is the conduct of reconstruction, the dome and the arch. For the entire citadel, of every 2 years, they're applying mat layers to protect against weather. So that is accumulating year by year and overloading. So we remove all the accumulated layers and we backfill with the proper material, and then we apply a lime cluster as an insulation, and we finish with the fire bricks. This is the Timurid Tower that I showed you at the beginning. There was some artillery on top of it, and it was badly damaged. We restored this tower and also the tile works. Here you see the garrison. There is 3 galleries, which this is the interior space, which later museum and archive set up in this space. So this was the team that for 2.5 years we conducted the conservation activities in the citadel. So my next presentation is no. Oh. So Balkh is also an ancient city north of the country. It has fortification, but earlier than Herat. So the fortification is from 1st century, and it's still visible. So here is I would discuss regarding the Khwaja Parsa project, shrine and the mosque. This is late Timurid building, which were built on Sufi Khwaja Abu Nasr Parsa. In 2012, when we received a fund, so the aim was to restore the detachment of the tiles. So when we got access to the top rooftop, we saw a lot of detachment, and even the the material that were sticking the tiles on the structure were completely decomposed. And so we saw a lot of cracks here, even in the structure. It was the only way were to dismantle all the tiles and to do stitching on the dome. So also we install a wooden structure to transfer the upper dome load to the lower dome and also to the side walls. So when we finish the consolidation of the dome, so we need to reassemble all the tiles that were taken down from the dome. So it was a very complicated geometry. Actually, we built one of the rafts, temporary. We applied a plaster on it, and we casted mold out of it. I mean, this is a convex shape, and we need a concave mold. You could see here one rafts. For one raft, we produced like 16 pieces of mold, and then we assemble all the tiles and hoist back to the place, and we put the panels, and each panel were different from each other because it was very complicated geometry. It was tapering to the top, and it was a semicircle shape. So another challenge for tiles, we couldn't find the best quality in the region. Only one factory were producing glaze tile. So that was very spontaneous decision during the course of that project. We wanted to produce tiles, and we tried a lot. We used a lot of glasses. We recycled that. So finally, we were able to find the recipe for the glass that we're using during Timurid time. Actually, they were bringing a kind of shrubs, which is growing in salinate areas, especially on the river bank of the river. And we burnt it off, and we mixed the residue with the silica sand, and we put them in a fire to melt that. And finally, we were producing glass out of it, and that glass is very compatible for the tile, for making tiles. So here you could see the production of tile on the side. So we're casting the tiles, and we just baking them in a furnace, and then we mixing the recipes or the glasses, and then applying on it. Here on the other kiln, you could see the color, the desired color, different color with different oxides. We were able to find the way. So this is another technique for tiles, which called stencil. Copying the drawing on the 1-to-1 scale, and then pursing the outline. I mean, copying by trace paper or by plastic sheet, and then you applying on the surface of baked bricks, and you imitate the, you push the pen on it, so the dot line is connecting, and you imprinting the pattern on the surface, and then you applying a kind of, it's called manganese. a black color, which is a border between when you're applying two colors. Because it's glass, it's fusing, melting. So in order to be an obstacle between two colors, not to amalgam or mix together. So we were using these techniques. So in some places, it was not necessary to restore the whole building with the fire, with the glazed tiles. In some places we use unglazed, and we just we copy the pattern, obviously, with the background color. It's here. I want to show you in this picture tree intervention in this dune. If you see here on the, can you see my cursor? So if you see this part of Muqarnas, this is called zone of transition. So this is the original stalactite or Muqarnas, and here is the previous intervention, and this was the last intervention that that has done by EKTC or by us. So this shrine had two wings, one to south, one to the north. So one of the southern wings were damaged due to the earthquake in 18th century. So, so the whole design concept of this replica or reconstruction of this mosque were according to the squinchnate, which were remained intact in this place. So we had the height, we had the foundation, so we were able to do, this mosque properly. So on the northern side, there was another chamber, concrete mosque, and also we removed that mosque. So in this place, we need a space for prayer. So we built a new mosque for this side. Here you could see it's completely different from the other sides. Here we use pillar. So the good thing for this project, we have access to anything that we were able to produce tiles or muqarnas in the site. So in Islamic architecture, the good thing when they were changing one shape to another, for example, if you see here, this is a circular shape. We need a square base for 4 arches. So that's called zone of transition. So we use the stalactite or the tiles, and we make the shape better and proper for that base. And also we use, in some places there were for the dome we need circular shape, because between 4 arches the space could be a rectangle. So for that we use a squinchnate here. So this is the mosque we designed, and it was given to the community. So that was it.
Hello. Yeah.
That was the final slide.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. If you can stop sharing and we can get Sonam on, we can start a conversation. Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. I'll just start with some sort of comments, and you can see Dhruv is with us, Dhruv Mehta. He is part of the South Asia Students Group at the Graduate School of Design, and every session we have one student who also joins the discussion. But let me join with, let me start with just some very broad comments. We already have a question for each of you, and then Dhruv will have questions. Yeah. So, what was very interesting is both of you address the issues related to the tradition, responding to tradition. I think Daud, you were talking about how you conserve it, but learn from it, innovate within it, bring new methods. It's clearly a critical practice. Now, I think in the context of Afghanistan, there are challenges, and we'd like to hear from you about some of that. It's interesting how you also, as you talk about tradition, you're also looking at it critically in that, the house that you showed us, its performance, the winter and summer courtyards, the kind of the logic behind tradition in a much deeper way than just the aesthetic or the visual kind of components. And so I think you showed us all the way from technology to climatic performance, and you were at every stage teasing those issues out and not even actually focusing so much on the aesthetic, which comes naturally out of that logic, correct, in some ways, whether it's for defense, whether it's for climate, whether it's the constraints of materials that allow building in a certain way. So I think it was really quite educative to see that in the context of Afghanistan, but also to see places that haven't been adequately celebrated in conversations. And so I think very educative. Thank you very much for that. And Sonam sort of picks up the tradition in a different way. In the context of Bhutan, it's alive and kicking. Of course, the constraints of development have challenged it, and I think that image you had, Sonam, of the essentially glass building on the corner with some bands of traditional motifs was really fascinating. I mean, that's the ultimate hybrid kitsch, whatever you call it, right? And that building, in a sense, is emblematic of perhaps in Bhutan, almost government policy wanting to create that continuity, in a sense. And so the bad versions of it are the ones you showed in that image. And I think what's very interesting, I kept hearing, thinking about Christopher Alexander in your presentation in terms of the pattern language, because what you were really, highlighting for us is that there's a clear pattern, and that pattern has to do with an organizational logic. Animals below, people live above for heat and thermal reasons. The use of material, there's a complete logic. But you also, I think, very much emphasized, and you showed us in the bad examples, what really goes wrong is the scale and proportion. So the challenge then becomes really how, besides organizational logics, besides material, besides the decorative aspects and the artwork and the colors and the pigments you use for the colors, the way contemporary programs are aggregated and organized have to be very mindful for scale and proportion. Otherwise, you can distort the scale and proportion, and the traditional vocabulary means nothing. You get really ugly buildings because it becomes very superficial. Whereas by controlling the scale and proportion, and you have a lot of examples even of large-scale things in your Bhutanese tradition, the zongs, the monasteries, etc. And so I was very impressed how you took the completely new programmatic requirement of a healthcare facility to make it cutting edge, to go to Singapore to see what new technologies are, but kind of reweave it down through scale and proportion and details and the use of wood and warmth and the culture and space to become very local. So, you have both brought to us the deployment of tradition, the understanding of tradition within two completely different constraints of political kind of context to show how we can make architecture. So I found that really very enlightening and fascinating. So thank you both for your presentations. I'm going to quickly jump to the questions in the chat, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dhruv for some of his reflections and questions. There is a question for both of you from Abdul Shibili. The first question for Sonam is, that he wanted to know that in the context of climate change, and especially in the topographic conditions of Bhutan. I know you mentioned seismic and you mentioned some other constraints, but is that a discussion? I'm going to extend that question. What is the discussion on climate change in Bhutan? What are the factors that you consider in your buildings? And for Daud, there is a question which again, Abdul, excuse me, Sibili, I really enjoyed the historic reference. I was wondering how Herat fared during the years of the Taliban war, 2001 to 2021.
Okay.
Sonam, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, Rahul, the first question was on the difficulties faced by the project due to climatic condition. I think that's what the question is about, right? So, if we look into the climatic condition in Thimphu, especially now, this project is located in Thimphu. So here, if you look at the climatic condition, the temperature, if you look at it, winters we go like 3 degrees, and peak of the summer is like 30, 31 degrees. So what we do is during the construction phase, especially if it's related to construction, what we do is usually we face difficulties during the winters, especially because especially it's during November, end of November, December, January till February end, we don't do any construction or any casting of slabs or anything related to RCC because the setting is very difficult at that temperature. So that's one condition problem which we usually face in Thimphu, especially because of the climatic condition. And related to topography, since as an architect, I've been practicing here for more than 14 years. We have learned our ways how to work along with the topography when it comes to design. So for this particular project, Mother and Child Hospital, the topography which when we worked on it, it was not that complicated. For us, it's very natural to have that level of terrain and topographic. So it was much easier, but however, topography, sometimes some of the architects, they feel that topography is a very difficult way of working in any design, but sometimes it becomes an opportunity to create a different level of spaces, interesting spaces at different scale or different level. So yeah, so that, I think I hope I answered the question.
Yes, and is there a lot of conversation about climate change in Bhutan?
We do. We have a lot of conversation on climate change. So now at this stage, we are also looking at heating our building. So if you look at it, 2 to 3 years before, we were not taking care of how to do a natural heating system in our building and all. We never used to look into that factor. But when it comes to these hospitals, we have to really take care of how it is patient friendly. The comfort of the patient is the main priority in any healthcare system. So in this case, what we do is we try to make sure we use insulation, especially in the walls. And we also make sure we use floor heating system wherever it's possible. So yeah, these are the alternatives which we use when it comes to climate control of the building.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonam. Dua, do you want to just tell us about the context, the political context? I mean, you can speak to it as carefully or not carefully as you like, but what were the effects on the war over the decade? And because, you talked a lot about the effects on these environments because of uncontrolled development. But did the war also have an effect on what could be done? And some of the conservation work you've done during that period, and what were the constraints working?
Post 2000, the Herat intact city where, it was even during the Taliban time, 2002, it was still intact. So after that, when money came and democracy came to the country, and also a lot of migrants came from the neighbor country, and they brought very different style of architecture, which were not compatible with the environment. And globalization also an issue nowadays. People need new, facilities. And, there were a lot of issues. So, after that, the city becoming, destroyed, and a lot of destruction happened during the city. So we have no tools that time, to force people, to stop destruction of the city or properties. So we were encouraging people, and aware them through, reconstruction or repairing some buildings that was private and public areas, buildings. And it's still happening nowadays. In some places, war was also a big issue. The damage the city because it was using by the opposite, parties, and they were shooting through houses, and that was happened through the old city of Herat.
Thank you very much. Dhruv, before I go to you, there's a question from Anju Mala, who's a guest, who talks about transition from traditional to modern, basically asking why should we only do that in conservation and why not in contemporary buildings around South Asia. I think Bhutan demonstrates that that can be done, and it's partly the architects, partly policy, partly patronage that ensures it. And so, I mean, I don't want to spend time on that question because I think it's a very relevant question, but I think both our speakers have answered that in different ways. And that's the kind of question we could raise again in another session where this question is not being discussed, right? So, Dhruv, I'm going to hand it over to you for your reflections. There are also a couple of other questions in the chat which you might want to pick up on.
Thank you, Rahul. Also, thank you, Daud and Sonam, for fantastic lectures. It's always great to see people doing sensitive work in contexts that are so specific. So thank you so much for that. Before I sort of move to the question that is in the Q&A, I'd like to sort of offer some ideas that you guys can choose to reflect on or not. But the constraints, especially for Sonam, like the constraints that Bhutan has, which are so positively used in your case, like the traditional architecture, the limited palette of materials, the response, like at 2 or 3 moments in the lecture, you said that the response of the people is that when they enter the building, they should not feel like they're in an alien space, they should feel familiar. So all of these things, you've turned it around, the constraints, you've turned it around into a positive design opportunity. And I'd like some of Daud's reflection on that particular topic about how in Afghanistan he views certain constraints that the region affords you in case of material, in terms of politics, in terms of patronage, who's commissioning these projects, and where is the money coming from, and who are the people who are going to eventually use it. So I loved some of Daud's reflections on that. And the other way around, I'd also, for Daud's lecture, I feel that the conservation work that was done so well also focuses on the architectures that have already existed and repairing those. And for new things that might be coming up around those structures in Herat, what are the trends that you are seeing, and what are the trends you think will come up in future? So are architects being sensitive? Are they being taught to do that through pedagogy, through education? And Sonam can also reflect on how conservation work has been done in Bhutan in general. So I'd love some of your thoughts on that.
So my reflection on Herat Wool City, in our country, always been suffer a lot from the ravage or from the conflict. We don't have even mandates for, for preserving historic monuments. We have, so later on, we have a commission for supporting Old City or Heritage Building through Herat City. And also we had a giant program with UNESCO, to making zoning for historic monuments. And it was, these are all through, text and paper. It does not happen through Herat, and, there was a lot of challenges. Also, in Afghanistan, bribes or corruption were rampant, and there were a lot of changes, and they, even there is a place where called Musala Minarets area, and there were a lot of new building mushrooming around that, and we were not able to stop that. So the stakeholder, I mean municipality or the preservation of historic monument, were responsible for that. But it was somehow we spend a lot of time there, a lot of investment. We have foreign donors, we have Aga Khan monies spending there, but it was quite difficult to say, we were somehow not able to control all these things, because that was government responsibility, and we lost very precious, valuable monument in the city.
Sonam, your reflections, and then we can move on to the question in the chat.
Hello?
No, I was waiting for Sonam to.
I haven't got it.
Okay, yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So, Dhruv, you just, for me, my practice is a little bit different compared to the conservation works which is carried out in Bhutan. I know that the previous speaker from Bhutan was Pema, a very good friend of mine. So she works as a chief in the conservation Department of Culture, where she does a lot of conservation work. So based on that, the idea which I have from the work she have done is that most of the fortresses and the monasteries or the temples, which a huge lot of major work of conservation works done by Pema's office are all living monuments. So they are all living. So it's all functional. People are still using those those structures or fortresses as offices. So for those kind of conservation works, I think Pema and her team, they look into a different way of how it works in Afghanistan. So it's a little bit different comparatively, because whatever the conservation works they take care, they have to make sure that it is structurally safe, and if there's a window which needs to be changed, they try to change the whole wooden window so that it's usable by people who are living there, or the offices which are set there. So it's kind of a little bit different as comparatively. So from my side, I think this is the only information I know about conservation when it comes to monuments and fortresses. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a question that Isaac has asked in the chat. He thanks you for the beautiful presentation, both of you guys. And he's asking, architecture as discourse operates at different speeds and has multiple narratives. And he's asking like how important are art historic narratives to your private practice as compared to the local patronage and politics? Are grand narratives like nation building influence your thinking about what architecture is in your specific context? Yeah. Maybe Sonam, you can start and then we can
Okay.
go to the
Sure. Sorry, I'll just read the questions once more. In case of Bhutan, I think it's very straightforward. Here, in my presentation, I have mentioned that we totally follow the vision of gross national happiness. So this is where we look into cultural preservation, and we are also looking into how to preserve identity, even in case of architecture. So when it comes to that, we have certain rules and regulations which is very important to follow. So most of the architectural practices which we do, we try to make sure that we stick to those rules and regulations, and there is no false interpretation of Bhutanese architecture. Although you can see that some of the structures are already up, which has a different scale of proportion, which is not, it does not look much of Bhutanese at the moment sometimes. So at present, there's a strong emphasis from the government as well to look into this. So
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was always been involved in Timurid buildings. The proportion of those buildings were, I haven't been work on a new building, but we don't have regulation for that as well. Different regions or different. When you look through Kabul, from development of the city, when German came, they brought German style buildings, and then Russians, they brought the Russian styles. Everywhere is very, very different, and we don't have typical styles for architecture. So I was always been involved in historic buildings and not in a new buildings.
Thanks.
And when you look through the Timurid style buildings, the proportion, they were just emphasized were on the proportion, and which later on you could see in Mughal buildings, they were using double domes, like I show you the Khoja Parsa Mosque in Balkh.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Dhruv, have you got any other questions or?
No.
Okay, I just sort of want to ask one last sort of response from you all is Daud and Sonam, and of course it'll be different. How do you see the next 4 or 5 years? What are you going to be doing? In the sense, what are the projects that you have on the drawing board right now, or what might you like to do, given your experience so far? You're at that point in your trajectory. Both of you have got a wonderful portfolio of experience in terms of the work, and in the context of Bhutan and in the context of Afghanistan. What do you see yourself doing? I think, of course, in Bhutan, it'll be different. There's much more continuity. Daud, I think you face the challenge of, seeing forms of patronage. Of course, the Aga Khan Trust is a form of patronage. Will there be other forms of patronage, or is that going to be very limited?
That's exactly very limited in Afghanistan, but Aga Khan still working there. And I think we would working, on, new projects in future in Kabul, and Kabul River Front project is still on progress. And there is also fortification Kabul Balahisar, and there is integrating the modern concept in the old one. So when you look the Kabul Riverfront project, it's an old buildings, but we change somehow. We adapt that adaptation of the building would be different. We integrate new function to the old buildings.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonam.
Yeah, I feel the new era of technology for Bhutanese architects here is, since you know that Bhutan is a carbon neutral country with more than 70% forest cover, I feel Bluelam technology, GLT, CLT is something which I want to look into in the new project. This will totally change the dynamics of construction industry in Bhutan. So I want to make sure that we don't import a lot of materials from the other countries, rather than we use what is abundant in our country and make use of it. And this will not only benefit the country as a whole, but also it can create a new scenario of building technology in the country. So that is what I'm looking forward to.
Great. Look forward to seeing how all of this evolves, and good luck with the work. So I just want to, close by again thanking the Lakshmi Mittal South Asia Institute for supporting this, and the Architecture Foundation India for all the support they give us, and of course to the South Asia Students Group at Harvard University, Dhruv, Ashna, who's here, Devashri, Pranav, and many others who've helped, Rolo, who helps us with our graphics. Thank you all to make this successful. Our next two sessions will be April 1st and April 8th. On April 1st, we have, on both sessions, we have one architect from India and one from Bangladesh. So there will be two architects from Bangladesh and two from India. And this will take us to our 12th session. So we would have completed 24 lectures. And hopefully we will resume this series again in September. I think it's been interesting and educative for us. And as you know, all this goes online and we've been posting the links. So this is also forming an archive of lectures. And I can assure you many people are visiting these recordings later. Besides people who logged in today, there are many, many others who view this. And hopefully after September, we'll create some forum where we can convene in a bigger group to discuss some of what we have gone through in these many sessions. So hopefully it'll be an ongoing conversation on South Asia, emergent architects and architecture to start with, but it'll move to other things. So look forward to all of you participating in these conversations, and please join us for the other sessions on April 1st and April 8th, and we'll post those. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Sonam and Daud. Very much appreciate your efforts.